Hello and welcome to a brand new build. In today's video, I'm going to be making a model of Lae'zel, the Githyanki Fighter from Baldur's Gate 3. Now, I don't think I am alone in saying that Baldur's Gate 3 was possibly one of the most impressive RPGs I have ever played. The depth of systems, the world build, the story, and most importantly the characters were some of the best I have ever witnessed in a video game, to the point where I still now, however many years after release, find it quite difficult to put it down. And so, as somebody who is wanting to build a collection filled with characters that I love from, film, video games, comic books, etc., it seemed an obvious choice to start picking through the characters of Baldur's Gate 3 and start building models. Now, I got these models from a very, very good seller who I believe I have purchased from it in the past, quite possibly, and maybe years ago now. But it's a UK-based seller called Warrior Prince 3D, and I am blown away by the level of detail and quality on these things. They are slightly larger than I thought they were going to be, and obviously I'm saying they because I have bought two others as well, which will be projects immediately to follow this one. But focusing on Lae'zel, the level of detail is astounding. It's kind of on a level, honestly, with War that I have just painted. The intricacies in the armor, the skin tone, like the skin sort of detailing, the hair, the braids, all of that kind of stuff is exceptionally high quality. And so, I'm honestly trying to get through this intro as quickly as I possibly can so as I can start painting it. But the model itself, it's a little bit larger than I thought it was going to be. I kind of told myself after having finished War that I was going to just take it steady in the next project and paint something a little bit smaller. And whilst there aren't as many moving parts with this, the level of detail and I think the potential finish that Lae'zel could have, I think could be quite impressive. And so the routine is going to be exactly the same as it always is. I'm going to spray these black with a nice matte sort of primer to get a nice deep base color, and then slowly start picking through base colors, detailing, etc. until ultimately the finish of the project. I am very excited to see this one finished, partly because I also am equally excited to get started on the other two. But over time, it is my plan to paint through the main party of Baldur's Gate 3. I will be working my way towards doing the whole cast, and hopefully, if all goes well, I'll be able to end this little series with a bit of a project about building a display place for these models. So, lots to do, little time to waste, so let's get started. So the base colours have begun. For the most part, things are going on great. They're colours and paints that I've actually used on previous models already, so I know that they are reliable. But I have come to realise that Lae'zel has quite a limited colour palette. Browns for leathers in her hair, metalwork, silvery, metallic colours, and then the greeny kind of yellowy tone of her skin, and that's kind of it. Obviously there's going to be more happening with detailing and stuff, But yeah, for the most part, it's actually quite a limited colour palette. The one thing that I'm already stumbling on is the skin colour though. That kind of greenish, yellowy Githyanki colour is quite hard to find within the paints that I've got, so obviously I might have to mix something. But I started using this olive green here, which is the colour that I use for Kane, and that was horrendous to work with. So I do think I'm going to have to pivot away from that colour, but I haven't got a good alternative yet, so I'm just going to work on the rest and wait. So at long last, the base colours for Lae'zel have been applied and are completed. The painting process itself, well, no, let me get this right. The painting has been brilliant. I have thoroughly enjoyed my time painting Lae'zel. After I kind of solved the problem of this skin colour and found a paint within my actual model paints rather than an acrylic to use, the colours went on brilliantly, really smooth, really nice to use. I'm really pleased with where she's sitting right now, prior to the detailing phase. But painting has not been the most comfortable thing to do lately. A couple of weeks ago, I think it's about 3 as of the time of recording, I cracked a rib twice and have been in a fair amount of pain since, presumably sort of during that healing process that I'm still literally halfway through. I've been holding myself in such a way as to sort of alleviate pressure on the rib, because like I say, it's quite uncomfortable. So I've ended up simultaneously putting my back out and twisting my knee somehow. So yeah, sitting in the studio for hours on end, filming and painting, etc., has not been at the top of my priority list currently. Lying still, trying not to breathe, has been much higher up the list. So yeah, when I've managed to sit down and actually paint Lae'zel, progress was very fun and very swift. I was able to make huge amounts of progress when I sat down. I really haven't been able to sit down and do it for, well, quite as often as I would have liked. I think part of the reason I've made so much progress in the time that I've spent with her is this metalwork. I think since developing the technique I used on War, where black base, silvery kind of dry brushing over the top to just catch the edges of the details on the actual 3D model itself, it just gives me a really, at least for me, a really satisfying metallic look. And obviously, as you can quite plainly see in front of you, Lae'zel has a lot of armour on. And so, when I've been kind of working through these colours, as I've been applying the sort of silvery brush, so much of the model has come together far quicker than I expected. And yeah, it's put me in this position right now where I'm looking at a mostly complete version of Lae'zel a handful of weeks into starting, including injury time, so it's been very, very enjoyable to actually sit and work on this model, which I'm really, really pleased with. Details wise, as part of the base colouring phase, I add base colours to everything, so it should be representative of the colours, in every regard. The only thing I haven't touched as yet is the braids in her hair. I have put on a very, very, very dark brown coat just to kind of give a base, that isn't the shiny black. But my intention is to sort of dry brush a couple of different browns into her hair to sort of just catch the textures of the actual 3D model itself and just make the hair look that little bit more believable. But the thing I haven't touched is the braids. I want them to stand proudly outside of any dry brushing and stuff like that, so that the beads are really sort of pronounced, I guess, in her hair, and so for the time being I haven't touched them. You know, obviously it's probably going to be one of the final things I actually do on the model, is add those details, but yeah, for the time being that's the only thing that doesn't really properly have a layer of paint on it. The skin colour, I am actually, now that I'm sat in front of it at this point in the process, reasonably pleased. I think my concern was, I don't know why, but I didn't want her to look like Cain. And obviously I know Cain has green skin, or greeny yellowy skin, and Lae'zel also has greeny yellowy skin, so what's the problem if they look similar? But obviously I've been looking at reference imagery the whole way through this process, and I find 50% of the images make her look quite green, 50% of the images make her look quite yellow. And so I really, as I was kind of getting to this point where the model has, like I say, got a layer of paint on basically everything, I truly wasn't sure whether it was the right colour. You know, I wasn't confident in it. But once I managed to get rid of this god-awful acrylic paint and instead replace it with an actual proper model paint, once the colours started going on more smoothly, I've settled into it. I think it actually looks really good. And again, using Cain as an example, when I was painting him, again, he looked like vibrantly green when I was painting him the first time. But then as I added details, washes, and then dry brushing to him, the colours were just sort of knocked back step by step, so it took sort of like the intensity out of that green, and I have a feeling that's exactly what's going to happen with Lae'zel as well. I think she will just sort of slowly settle into herself, and the skin colour will start to look a bit more like what I want it to. In talking of skin colour, this this Mind Flayer head, as you can see, really purple currently, really purple. Again, I think this is the same story. I'm looking at a base colour and I'm not satisfied with how it looks. You know, I truly just don't like the palette of it. I just think it's a little bit too cartoonish for the moment. But without being too grotesque here, this is obviously, it's the severed head of a Mind Flayer. And so the skin texture is obviously going to be quite mottled and quite sort of, you know, damaged, if you like. It's not going to be a perfect complexion. So I'm probably going to be adding some sort of like wine reds, some maybe even sort of like deep blues, dark purples, to kind of like mottle the skin in such a way as it looks a little bit more like a severed head. And then on top of that, I'm going to be using the fake blood to obviously add detailing to the stump of the neck and have it run down. There's a damaged tentacle on this side as well that's been severed, so obviously that's going to all be added in to kind of like really knock those colours back. So I think, I don't know, I just think maybe for this one the base colours have just not been entirely pleasing to start with, but I think if I kind of pay attention to what it is I'm going to be doing sort of further down the line, I can kind of get over it to a certain extent. The base, as always, is going to be left till last. I really enjoy sort of getting the model done first, and then we can kind of make progress on the base, because generally speaking the bases come together incredibly quickly. But we are going to be entering into the detailing phase now. I've got a couple little bits of accenting that I want to do here and there, just to kind of add a little bit of separation between a couple of the bits, add some washes to the leathering so that the leather looks wrinkled and aged. Before obviously finally getting to dry brushing eventually. But yeah, progress is running well, you know, I'm pleased with how I'm doing. And hopefully over the next couple of weeks as I'm working on the details, I'll be able to sit for longer and longer each session. So details next, and then base at the very end. I'm going to resist the urge to do too many close-ups at the moment because we're very close to the final reveal of the completed model. And I don't want to jump the gun and give away the work that I've done sort of to complete Lae'zel. But I am pleased. There's a little bit of a thing just chewing away at the back of my mind that, I don't know, she came together so quickly and so easily, you know, that the whole thing, she just, every time I sat down to paint her, I just made huge amounts of progress. Like by the time I actually sat down and properly decided to sort of do the details and the dry brushing and all of that, she was done within a matter of hours. Like, you know, I keep comparing back to my most recent model, which was War from Darksiders, and that took me ages. There were so many pieces to him. There was that many intricate details that could be added on top of it because of the sort of scene that he was depicted in. And so I found myself adding and going back and going back. And the process was lengthy. But obviously, injury aside, Lae'zel, when I've actually sat to paint her, has come together so quickly. Like, it's alarming how quickly she came together. But I am pleased with the overall finish. You know, I think one of the things I'm kind of butting up against is the fact that it feels, I don't know, again, comparing to War, she feels very simple, like in her design, in comparison to him. So there's a part of me that feels like I should be doing more, or I should have added a few more details, or I should have, you know, gone above and beyond to try and achieve a look for her or whatever. And I keep looking back and I'm like, it looks like Lae'zel and it looks great. So yeah, I think that's a me thing rather than a model thing. I think one of the things I want to kind of briefly talk about is what I decided for her. So when I did armour on previous models, I obviously had that black foundation dry brushed with the silver to kind of catch the edges of the metalwork, and then over the top of that have added dry brushing. Now previously I've been doing that with, I did it on Kane, I did it a little bit on Ezio, and I did it on War. And obviously the thing with them was I wanted them to have a slightly aged look, especially Kane and War, because they are ancient beings. Like, the metalwork on them isn't going to look new, even remotely. And so there were sort of bits of that I wanted to be aged back to make the metal look worn. I kind of wanted the opposite for Lae'zel, because if you look at all the designs and obviously look at it from the game, her metal is like chrome almost, you know, it is that shiny, that bright. And so I wanted to kind of maintain that. So much like I alluded to earlier in the video, once I had done the initial dry brushing on the silver for the metalwork, I haven't touched it again. And I'm really happy with the look. It looks clean, and I think that's something that I've observed about Lae'zel. There's a sort of a, almost like a surgical cleanliness to her. You know, she's very sleek, very almost streamlined, I suppose is kind of a word that kind of fits here. You know, there's an elegance to her that those other characters that I was talking about don't have. And so I wanted the metalwork to look as clean as possible to sort of really depict that for her. But I think as a result of that, that's kind of cut down on my workload, right? Like, I've ended up in a position where things have come together rapidly because I haven't touched any of the metalwork since that initial base color phase, and she's covered in metal. So it's one of those things that I'm butting up against a little bit, but I am really happy with how she looks. The Mind Flayer head, that was just a process of adding, almost overdoing it, if you like, almost kind of going too much into the detail, because the more different purples I added and the more sort of congestion of colour, I suppose, the more aged, the more damaged, the more imperfect it began to look. And yeah, again, I'll wait to do close-ups and stuff like that until the reveal in a few minutes' time for you. But yeah, I'm really, really happy with how it came together. So like I say, I've got one more phase left, and to be honest with you, it seems to be the going thing with me making these models. The bases come together very quickly. Lae'zel herself already came together very quickly, but the base, I think, is going to be literally an afternoon and I'll be done. It's going to be a process of just adding earthy colours. I want it to be reflective of the Grove, so sort of like the first area from Baldur's Gate 3, because that's sort of when I think about Baldur's Gate 3, I always go there first. You know, the grove, sort of those forest environs, you know, that kind of stuff. That's where I go first. And so I want this base to reflect the grove and the sort of like the surrounding lands. So I'm going to be adding sort of like deep browns to begin with, and then dry brushing with a number of different browns to give that sort of almost like dry, kind of sandstony kind of look to it. And then I should have some foliage in my wardrobe that's just sort of, you know, like the little tack on sort of little bits of grass and shrubbery and stuff. And I'm going to decorate the base with those just to kind of allude to that part of the game. But yeah, like I say, I really don't expect this to take very long. And, you know, I think the reveal is going to literally be a day or so away for me. So really excited to get into that, and then I cannot wait to show you her properly. And here we are, once again, at the end. I have had a blast painting this model. I have truly enjoyed my time with Lae'zel. I think I kind of realised something though when I finished her, so like when I put the finishing touches on the base and actually assembled her. I think there's always been this background level of intimidation to the model work that I've done. You know, taking War, Ezio, even Raziel and Kain, you know, those characters, I don't know why, but there's been something about them that sort of, I've almost been nervous to start them, and it has led to multiple moments during the project in which I have put them off, or I have sort of delayed doing a complicated part of the model or whatever. And I realised as I was finishing Lae'zel that I didn't have that with her. I think, I don't know, maybe I'm settling into the routine of how I paint models. I'm settling into the confidence that I can kind of gain from having painted one. And this was a much different experience to the ones that I've done previously, in which I saw a piece that needed to be painted and just painted it, which sounds really daft. But like I say, there's always been this sort of background noise of, will it be good enough? And I didn't feel that this time, honestly. You know, as I was kind of working through the model, I knew exactly what I wanted from it. The cleanliness in the chrome sort of style armor was initially kind of like a bit of a wobble in terms of won't I keep it that way? I kept it that way and don't regret it at all. You know, again, sort of one of the wobbles that I mentioned previously was, is there enough detail on her to kind of really stand up to the models that I've painted previously? And again, I think the answer is yes to that. You know, fair enough, she came together really quickly, but I think the look speaks for itself. I think she sort of ended up being really quite impressive, something that I'm really proud of. But yeah, so like I say, there was an ease to this model that I haven't really experienced with the others yet, in which everything just kind of fell into place. I just sort of, you know, fair enough, cracked ribs and bad backs and dodgy knees aside, you know, when I've actually decided to sit down, in my mind, I have been very comfortable just painting away, completing little parts of the model, and ultimately reaching a finish that I think is really quite good. You know, I'm really pleased with it again. And that's wonderful. You know, I'm really, really pleased for that. The sort of the less mental obstacles, if you like. But just to quickly overview Lae'zel, like I say, really thrilled with the actual outcome. The base came together in an afternoon, exactly as I predicted. It was about an hour and a half, 2 hours. I think the longest part of the said process was actually waiting for the base brown to dry before I could go over it with numerous others. Yeah, there's a kind of a haphazard kind of muckiness to doing bases like this, where it sort of needs to look like a woodland or a forest floor or something like that, in which I basically just put on a deep base colour, so a very, very dark brown, and then I just go to town kind of almost indiscriminately, just sort of slapping on washes of varying kind of greens and browns, dry brushing with sort of dustier versions of those same colours, and it really looks the part. And so, like I say, I don't know why they come together as quickly as they do, but the bases always are far less work than the models themselves. But yeah, I think it completes the piece. There is blood spatter sort of dripping from the Mind Flayer head, that I think looks really, really cool. It gives it a sense of momentum and sort of almost like a stillness in some ways as well, I think, in terms of like, this is a moment where she's kind of reveling in the victory over a geik and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, I'm really pleased with it. I think two things that may end up being redone at some point in the future, who knows. I made the decision with the sword, there is a single streak of blood across the blade. For those of you that watched me paint War, I did multiple kind of slashes and splatters of blood across his Chaos Eater blade, because I felt like I was replaying the opening scene of the game in that moment, and was sort of, there's a lot of fighting going on. With this, I don't know, I almost took sort of like a samurai kind of approach with her, in the sense that it was her versus her enemy, and with one decisive strike she defeated them. And so the red smear across the greatsword here is actually the same width as the neck on the neck stump on the Mind Flayer head. And so, I kind of liked the idea that she's that skilled a warrior and sort of patient enough to be able to just win that fight in a single blow. And so there's, like I say, a red smear across the blade where that happened, and that's it. I do worry that it looks a little odd, because the blade otherwise is mostly clean. I've decorated it with a few of the spots of blood, obviously as the fight kind of ended. But the blade otherwise looks very clean. And so, like I say, there's a part of my brain that sort of thinks that it looks a little strange. However, I'm happy with it for now. I keep looking at it, so I know there's part of my brain that's like, was that the right choice? And the other one is her eyes. Now, I've painted models, obviously you've seen them. I've painted models for a while, and obviously I used to do miniatures and all of that kind of stuff, and eyes I hate painting. I did them with Ezio, and thankfully you can't see them because of the way his hood hangs across his brow. But the eyes for Ezio look god-awful. They're not even pointing in the same direction. I tried 3 or 4 times, but it was just such a tight space to get my brush into that I couldn't seem to get it right in any way, shape or form. So I went for the sort of Batman eye approach, in which it was a single colour. And I did have Lae'zel's eyes white for a very brief period, and I thought the contrast was too high. It looked like they were glowing almost, and I didn't like that. So I went for this sort of golden colour, the yellow ochre kind of colour, and I think it makes her look fierce as hell. Like, I really like it, and I think it is that kind of Batman, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles kind of vibe, in which those sort of like detailless eyes they have a strange intensity to them when you can't see where they're looking, but they're looking at you, if that makes any sense. But yeah, so in the end I decided to go for the yellow eyes. On the right size model, under the right circumstances, it is something that I want to improve. Painting eyes in a way that look like they're actually, alive, awake, and looking at you. It is something that I want to kind of improve upon. But this wasn't the model for it, because like I say, when I actually kind of finished the detailing, I did the black kind of war paint under her eyes and stuff like that. It just made her look bad as hell, and I really, really like it for her. So like I say, it's not that it's necessarily a gripe or a criticism particularly, it is just a point of the model in which I potentially want to improve in future projects. But those projects will have to wait, because for now, Lae'zel is completed. You know, I'm really, really pleased with it. I'm so happy that I spent the time doing it, and even though it's not been the most comfortable experience physically, I'm so glad I took the time to paint them. I'm going to leave a link in the description to the Etsy seller that I bought these from, because like I say, you can see for yourself the quality of the actual prints. They are fantastic, and I highly recommend looking them up if you're interested in model painting yourself. But for now, we'll be moving on to the next of my trio, which will be Karlach. So I suppose I will see you then.